Here we go.
Alright, good afternoon. Today we're going to perform a pre-trip inspection. My name is Mario Guranov with Bobby Best Transportation. The first thing you want to do is make sure the key's in your pocket so nobody can start the vehicle while we're doing the pre-trip inspection. Next thing you want to do is observe the vehicle. Make sure it's not leaning to either side. They would indicate if it's a suspension problem or a flat tire. Next you want to check, make sure you start from the top down when you present the pre-trip inspection. So on top we have a clearance and ID lights. They're amber in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is windshield wipers, the hood, and the grill. You can always name a few components and add no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is your headlights. Make sure they're clear in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is your turn signals, both sides. Make sure no crack, no broke, missing bolts, properly mounted and amber in color. Next thing you want to check is your bumper. Make sure it's not loose, all the bolts are intact. And next thing you want to check also your plate. Make sure it's up to date and no missing, which I always have on the windshield. Next thing you want to do is open the hood and check your passenger side.
Okay.
When you lower the hood, hold on to it so it will not break. First thing you want to do is also check the components from the top down. You want to check your coolant level. Make sure it's between full and add. Make sure all the hoses are attached with a good clamp around it. There's no water leaks. Anytime you have hoses, make sure name the part and there's no leaks, either water or oil. In this case we have no water leaks. Next thing you want to check is your alternator. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure the wires are not fried, and make sure your alternator belt, it's a good tight, and there's no, it should have no more than 1.25 inches of play. Next thing you want to check is your water pump. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, and there's no leaks. Next thing you want to check is your turbo right there. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure all the hoses are attached and with a good clamp around it. Next thing you want to check is your turbo elbow pipe that connects to the exhaust system. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, no air leaks. Next thing you want to check is your dipstick. You check it twice, pull it, clean it, stick it back in twice, and make sure it's between add and full if you need to add some oil with the 15W40 oil. Next thing you want to continue with the exhaust system to follow underneath the tractor and check your muffler. Make sure no crack, no broke, missing bolts properly mounted. Do not touch. If it's hot, there will create any problems. Okay. Next thing you want to check is passenger side of the tractor. Make sure your handle and the steps are holding the driver's weight. Make sure there's no oil and grease. They'll prevent any hazards. Next thing you want to check is your battery. Currently we have one battery. Make sure that all the wires are not fried or corrosion and no unusual smell. Next thing you want to check is your passenger side door. Make sure open and close is fine. Check the windows. Open and close. Make sure no crack, no broken, missing bolts, properly mounted. Check your mirror brackets. Make sure there's no crack, broken, missing any bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to do is check the driver's side. The same on the driver's side. Start from the top down, work our way. Make sure you check your washer fluid between add and full. If you need, you can add some liquid. Next thing you want to check is your air compressor, which is right there. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, no air leaks. Make sure all the clamps are attached. Next thing you want to check your steering system. So we have to differentiate between steering system, suspension system, and a brake system. So the first one I'll start from the top down is my steering arm. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted with a good U-joint bolt and well greased. Next thing you want to check is my power steering reservoir. Make sure it's between 8 and full. You don't have to open it, just talk about it. If you need to add extra fluid, make sure all the holders are attached and good clamp around it. There's no oil leak. Next thing you want to check is my power steering box, pitman arm, drag link, upper and lower control arm, and tie rod right there. Make sure all no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted with a good cutter key and cussing out between the pitman arm, drag link, upper and lower control arm, and a tie rod. Next thing you want to check is my suspension. So we're going to start from the front and the rear spring mounts. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is my spring leaf. Make sure there's no illegal welds and they're not cracked or broke. Next thing you want to check is my U-bolt and shock absorber. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is my brake system. So we start from the top down. First we want to check our hoses. Make sure there's no air leaks and all the clamps are tight, attached, and no cuts or bruises on the hose. Next thing you want to check is my brake chamber with a good C-clamp around it. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is my slack adjuster. It should be between 1 and 2 inches of a plate. Anything over 2 inches of a plate, it's out of service. Next thing you want to check is my brake shoes and brake drum. Make sure the brake shoes shouldn't be less than 1.5 inches of thickness and no oil or grease on it. Next thing you want to check is my tire. We talk about we want to check is for erosion, bruises, and cuts. Make sure there's none of those above, and also you can say ABC method. Make sure the tire is no less than 432 seconds of the tire depth, and it's 110 psi of air. Next thing you want to check is your rim. Make sure there's no illegal welds, properly mounted, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts. Check the air valve, make sure there's no air leaks, and check your lug nuts as well. Make sure there's no corrosion around it, and there's discoloration that tells us that the lug nuts are loose. Next thing you want to check is your hub oil seal. The way we do it, we remove the rubber and stick the finger, and if it's low on oil, we can add 90 weight gear oil. Next thing you want to check is my fuse box. Make sure there's no broken or missing, and all the fuses are intact, and we need to have spare fuses as well. Next thing you want to check is your driver's side of the tractor. First thing we're going to check is my turn signal, amber and color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is your driver door and mirror brackets. Mirror, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure the door handle opens and closes properly. Next thing you want to check is my window opener. Make sure it goes up and down. While we add it, we want to make sure we have a fire extinguisher which is properly charged, 5 BC general freight and 10 BC hazmat. Also want to check is your 3 emergency triangles which are inside the middle of the cab. They should stay on 50 miles an hour wind. Next you want to check is your driver steps and the handle. Make sure they hold on to the driver's weight. Make sure also check if there's any oil and grease to prevent any hazardous while we're doing a pre-trip inspection. Next thing you want to check is my fuel tank. Make sure it has a good saddle strap with a good rubber in between. Make sure checking your fuel cap, make sure it's tight, good rubber seal and chain on it. Make sure you don't lose it. Next thing you want to check is the rear cap of the tractor. Make sure the lights are working properly, don't crack, no broken, missing bolts properly mounted. Next thing you want to check your air lines, which is blue service, red, emergency. And want to check your electrical light, which is got 7 pins on both sides between the tractor and the trailer. Next thing you want to check is your catwalk. Make sure it's hold on to the driver's weight, no oil and grease, to prevent any hazardous. Next thing you want to check is your frame. On the tractor, make sure all the bolts are attached, no illegal welds, no crack or bark or missing bolts. Next thing you want to check is your drive shaft. Make sure it's well tight, connected, and a good U-joint bolt and well greased. Crack no broken, missing bolts properly mounted. Next you want to check, continue with the tractor. You want to check your suspension. First you want to do is check your front and rear spring mounts, spring leaves, U-bolt, shock absorber, and there's a torsion rod right there that connects both wheels and balance the movements on the tractor. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is my brake system. You start from the brake hoses. Make sure there are no cuts, bruises, and all the air, and there is no air leak. Next thing you want to check is your brake chamber. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, with a good C-clamp around it. Make sure you're not losing any air. Next thing you want to check is your slack adjuster. Anything that should be between 1 and 2 inches of a plate. Anything over 2 inches is out of service.
Okay.
Next thing you want to check is your brake shoes and brake pads inside the wheel. Make sure the pads are no less than 1.5 inches of thickness and no oil and grease around it. Next thing you want to check is your tire. It's a ABC method again, 232 and a tire thread and 110 psi. Make sure there's no debris between both wheels, and there's no daylight between the actual rims. And then you check your outer as well, the same as with inner. Make sure you check your rim, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure all your lug nuts are tight, no missing, and no discoloration color that tells you that it's loose. Next thing you want to check is your hub oil seal. The way we check it is we remove the cap, stick the finger. If it's missing, we can add 90 weight gear oil. Next thing you want to check is rear of the tractor. So we're going to go on there now. So we'll be checking here is my tail lights. They're 4 function. Park, brake, turn signals, and 4-way flashers. Make sure the crack, no broken, missing bolts properly mounted, red in color. Next thing you want to check is my 5th wheel platform. Make sure all the bolts are intact, attached, and there's no missing. Then next thing you check is your kingpin, trailer's kingpin, and make sure it's in lock position behind the locking jaws. Next thing you want to check is the trailer apron. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, and there is no daylight between the 5th wheel and the trailer apron, and well greased. Next thing you want to check is my cross member on the trailer. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. So next thing we want to do is we want to go outside again of the tractor. Watch your head. And we want to check the front of the trailer. We want to check the frame. Make sure there's no illegal welds, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure your glass handles on your air lines are well tight and not loose, and a good rubber in between. Next thing you want to check is your clearance light, amber in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Make sure your DOT inspection is up to date on the trailer as well as the tractor, and is visible. Next thing you want to check is side of the frame on the trailer. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Check your DOT tape, white and red in color and present. Next thing you want to check is your landing gear. 2 speeds. We have a high and low speed. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. You want to check the sand pad. Make sure it's free of debris so it won't create any hazards on the road. Next thing you want to check is your cross member on the trailer. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Continue on with the side of the frame. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, DOT tape present. Then we check our turn signals, amber in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Continue on. We have another turn signal, amber in color, no crack, no broke, missing bolts, properly mounted, no moisture inside. Side of the frame, same thing, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted, no illegal welds, DOT tape present. Next, you want to check is suspension on the rear of the trailer. We have a front and rear spring mount, spring lift, U-bolt, shock absorber, torsion rod. It's not visible, but it's there. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next, you want to check inner and outer tire. Before that, we want to check also the brake system.
Okay.
Brake hoses, make sure there's no cuts, bruises, no air leaks. Brake chamber, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, properly mounted. A good C-clamp around it. Then slack adjuster should be between 1 and 2 inches of plate. Anything out of 2 inches is out of service. Brake shoes and brake pads the brake shoe shouldn't be less than 1.5 inches of thickness. No oil and grease around it. Then we'll jump on the tires, inner and outer tire. ABC 232 tire depth, 110 psi, no air leaks. Make sure there's no deadlight between the rims and no debris between the tires. Outer tire, the rim, crack no broken, missing bolts properly mounted. All the lug nuts are tight, no loose, no discoloration in color that tells me they're loose. Next thing I want to check is my hub oil seal. The way we do it is removing the cap, stick the finger. If we need to add 90 weight gear oil, we do that. Now let's check your air valve, make sure there's no leak in any air. Next thing you want to check is your mud flap. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted. Should be no more than 6 to 8 inches of the ground. Continue on the side of the frame, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts. DOT tape present. Rear axle on the trailer, we check the same way we check the front.
Okay.
No, you don't need to name components.
Okay.
Next thing I want to check is ABS light. Amber in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted. Clearance light, red in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted. Next thing I want to check is the rear of the trailer. We want to check the DOT bumper. Make sure there's no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted with a good DOT tape in the back. Next thing I want to check is my tail light, red in color, 4 functions, park, brake, turn signal, 4-way flashes, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted. Next thing you want to check is my ID lights, red in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted, and works. Next thing you want to check is the plate light, make sure it works properly, clear in color, no crack, no broke, no missing bolts, and works properly. Next thing you want to check is my tag, make sure it's up to date and it's not missing. Next thing you want to check is my mud flaps on both sides. No crack, no broke, no missing bolts properly mounted. Should not hang between 6 and 8 inches of the ground. Next thing I want to check is my right side of the trailer. I check the same way I've checked to the left side, and that's how my pre-trip inspection is finished outside of the truck.
Okay.
Thank you.